Hey, everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and my guest tonight is Jamie Ottesen, MSW, LCSW. She has an amazing story of healing and recovery from 38 years of bulimia and food addiction. She has 22 months of recovery from bulimia and almost 4 years of abstinence from sugar and most processed foods. And during her recovery process, she has lost 100 pounds and reclaimed her health through a plan of abstinence and exercise. Jamie is a mother and has raised 3 adult sons, and now she is working to help those who are battling these diseases. She has a blog, which is her name, Jamie Ottesen, which is spelled JamieOttesen.blogspot.com. And she has a wonderful story up on the True North website. It's called the True North Navigator. That's actually how I first heard about Jamie, was reading her story of recovery, which has also been published in the Health Science magazines, the winter edition 2015. You can contact Jamie on her Facebook page, which is Rocking Resilience. And you can also email her at rockingresilience@gmail.com. Jamie's greatest hope and desire is to help others get free and find recovery. As she says, it is the sweetest freedom. And I agree. Life without sugar is the sweetest freedom. So thank you, Jamie, so much for being here.
Thank you, AJ. It's great to talk to you and talk to your audience tonight.
Right. I feel like I know you because, the minute I read that story, because I'm subscribed to the True North, when they sent their mailings out, I was just blown away for so many reasons. Because, well, first of all, the before and after is astounding. So regardless of how it happened, just when you see a transformation like that, it's like, wow, this is so cool. But what really struck me about your story, Jamie, is not that you recovered from bulimia, because I think other people have, but that you had it 38 years. That's a really, really long time, number one. And number two, what I found absolutely fascinating about your story, and I'm sure you'll talk about, is that, a lot of people that I know that have been bulimic, and by the way, I've been bulimic myself, but only for 6 years. When I was 25, it was, it was from 19 to 25, so 1979 to 1985. And I know how horrible it was to have it for 6 years, but 38 years, that's a long time. But what was so interesting, Jamie, to me about your story is that, at least I know for me and many other women, we start these behaviors and that turn into bulimia because the idea is we want to be able to eat a lot of food, but we also want to be trim. But at some point, your bulimia stopped working for you. You weren't trim after a while. So we've got to get to talk about that. But first, just in case there's somebody out there that doesn't know what it is, how do you define bulimia?
Let me define bulimia for you. Out of the Webster Dictionary, it's a serious eating disorder that occurs chiefly in females. It's characterized by compulsive overeating, usually followed by self-induced vomiting or laxative or diuretic abuse. It is often accompanied by guilt and depression, also called bulimia nervosa. It's estimated, too, just as a statistic, that 4% of all females in the U.S. have bulimia during their lifetime. 3.9% of these bulimics will die. And of those practicing bulimia, only 6% obtain treatment.
Wow. That's the thing, because I think there's a lot of shame with the disease, don't you? Don't you think so? Is that what you think seeks a lot of people from getting help?
Yes. It's a disease of complete isolation.
Yeah.
It's a disease of secrecy and shame and judgment. It's a feeling of badness, and it's a feeling, a lot of self-hatred and self-loathing goes with it.
Right.
And it requires me to be dishonest every day of my life.
Wow.
Very lonely.
I think that a lot of addiction in general is just a disease of isolation, because I think these diseases really only exist in isolation for the most part.
Yes, it existed. I'm actually extremely humbled today to talk to you and to your audience. I just have to say at the beginning of this interview that I never thought this day would come. I never ever thought that I would ever get out of this disease, that I would ever get free of it.
It must be an incredible feeling then to wake up every day free of it. I can't imagine how happy you must be.
Yeah, it is truly, it feels like I've walked out of a prison and that I was in a cage, literally in a cage that I could never escape, that I lived in for 38 years of my life, which is the majority of my life.
Yes, you're not that. I think you're my age. You're like 50 something, right? Or
52 years old.
Yeah. Than me, yeah. And it's amazing how you were able to hide it from, you had the family, so that's pretty amazing too.
It required, as I look back on my life and what it required of me, it was incredible. I don't know how I did it, how I was able to manage the disease and keep it from just about everyone in my life, my family, my children who were raised have no idea about this. But there's a sadness about that too, of trying to live your life, live two different lives, and manage something that is literally just ripping you apart inside and causing you so much shame and guilt. And
it must be like a full-time job. It must have taken up a lot of time,
Yeah, it did. It took a lot of time, but somehow I was able to, I was so addicted to the disease. I was so addicted to the binging and purging. I mean, it was what I did with my life. I mean, I did other things, but it was what I did in secret. It is how I coped. It was like crutches for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was as if I had a handicap and I used crutches every day of my life. That's what I used to cope and numb my feelings and get through my day. And I did manage to hide it from the rest of the world. But yeah, that took a tremendous amount of energy and effort and was very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. And if having you on this interview, if even one person has helped, if one person is listening that has this disease, regardless of how much they're suffering or how long they've had it, or if they know somebody it has, I think that your story just gives people hope because, like I say, 38 years is a really, really long time, but 38 days is a long time if you're suffering too. And I want you here because I want people to know when they're going to hear your story that there really is hope. Why do you think there's just so many eating disorders? And like you say, it affects primarily women, but it just seems that the girls are being affected younger and younger and younger.
I would say, that I think it's affecting women, but I think it did even 38 years ago.
Sure.
There's this constant desire and feeling that to be worthy and to be valued and to be what you have to be enough. You have to be thin.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be thin, for some people, it just requires a lot of the bulimic women that I've talked to,
mm-hmm.
They're athletes and they're women that live very amazing lives, but they live and they're perfectionists. They have jobs, they have everything, but the secret life of trying to be enough and be good enough and be thin enough, and it's just a drive that I had all of my life as well.
Yeah. Wow. So when did you start? When did you first become bulimic? Like, how old were you when you first?
AJ, I started. It was just out of I didn't expect to become bulimic. This was back in the late 1970s when no one knew what bulimia was.
Sure.
I kind of started with anorexia, but I had this feeling of I was really overweight and fat. I weighed about 105 pounds. And I started feeling like I was fat. I was afraid to go into high school. And so one day I just realized I started to throw up. I just induced vomiting. No one told me about it, but I began doing that, and before I knew it, I was binging and purging almost everything I consumed.
Wow.
I knew that it wasn't good for me. I knew that it was hurting me, but I could not stop the behavior. The purging, I've realized since I've stopped the bulimia, is a very addictive process too.
Yeah.
For bulimics.
Imagine.
The bulimic behavior just became more and more extreme for me, where I would consume 10 to 30,000 calories a day, and sometimes purge up to 15 to 20 times a day.
Oh my.
I knew my addiction was completely out of control, but I was addicted to being thin, and the more that I did this, the more I isolated, the more I lived in the secrecy and the shame. And I think to compensate for trying to feel like a good person, I worked really hard at pleasing people and trying to be good and look good. But the overall effect of it was shame began to just completely permeate my life, and a feeling of badness took over my thoughts. And I felt like I had to punish myself and felt like I was never enough.
Yeah.
And so this behavior that I had, the bulimic behavior, continued all through high school. many, many times. I was really, really sick. I was so weak. I could hardly make it through a day of school. I had headaches, stomach aches, and my family that I lived with, they knew about the behavior, but they unfortunately their response was shame and to criticize me. So I didn't really have I didn't stop, and I didn't know where to turn for help.
Yeah, it's amazing that like nobody at school like sent you to a doctor, or even if you had gotten sent, maybe you wouldn't have disclosed what was really wrong. Who knows?
I went on to college and I continued the purging, and at that point, I could hardly keep food in my body because I actually had just this compulsion and tremendous urge to purge the food. It got to a point where I was so uncomfortable with food in my body. And I did have several trips to the emergency room where I felt like my stomach was going to explode, and another time I was just so sick. But I could never, the fear and the shame kept me from ever telling the truth. I never told anyone. I never told the doctor. I just continued the behavior and kept it a secret.
Was there any pleasure involved at all in the binging, or was binging more like just the compulsion to get in as many calories as you could as fast as you could and then get rid of it?
As I look at the binging behavior now, it was really an emotional release for me. It was really about what I was feeling and what I was struggling with inside of me. Feelings of worthlessness and feelings of fear and feelings of despair and guilt. I really ate out of emotional relief to numb my feelings. That was really the truth of what was bringing on the binges.
Yeah.
I can't say that there was joy in doing it, except that it was a way to release pain and release myself. I mean, the food, I was able to release the food out of me, which I guess there was a little bit of comfort in that. But that slowly began to be actually a nightmare for me.
I know we have some people in our Ultimate Weight Loss Program that do binges, and I hope that they'll get help so that they won't, so that it won't turn into full-blown bulimia, because it gets more difficult once you start engaging in the behaviors. I mean, not that I'm pro binging, but I mean, I don't want them to turn into somebody that engages in, the vomiting or the laxatives or the overexercise, because then I think it really does become like that, an addiction too, and it gets out of control, and then there's a lot of consequences when they start crossing that line. I remember, like, I was anorexic too. I was anorexic from about 11, we could say 11, but let's say 14 to 19. And the bulimia for me came out of like starvation. Basically, I was really hungry. And then I remember somebody said, and I started putting on weight, and somebody said, well, why don't you do what I do and just stick your finger down your throat? And I'm thinking, like, God, what a great friend, when I look back on it. But I know that, like, in ancient times, like in the Roman times, they would have these, I think they were called bacchanalia. They'd have these festivals, and they'd have something called a vomitorium, where they would like actually induce vomiting so that they could overeat. And that's not good.
No.
Not a good way to party, not at all. So what I'd always love about these stories of recovery, because whether I see them in movies or meeting, extraordinary people like yourself, or like I think about the movie Flight. What was your wake up call? Like you went from being bulimic for 38 years to not being bulimic. Was there a pivotal moment in your life, like where you just one day said enough? Tell me about that day, because that to me is the most exciting thing, that what the beginning of the recovery process was for you.
Okay. For those who haven't read my story, what I did is I basically realized that my life was completely unmanageable, that I realized that I had no power over my addiction, that I could not stop, that I needed help. I quit looking for the easy fix. I realized I was looking for surgery. I was looking for pills. I mean, all of my life there was something to do that would fix this. And I finally realized that it was up to me. There was a day when I realized, and it was a day of coming. It was coming for me. But I realized that I was ready, that I had become entirely ready to stop using food. And that I also realized that the only way for me to change what I was doing with the food addiction also was to begin a plan of abstinence. And I also realized at that time, I also called out to God because I was pretty hopeless. I had I I had lived my life feeling like food could never be taken from me. It was it was it was all I had to use in my life, and I was so fearful of having the food taken. But at the same time, I think there was a point where I realized that with God's help and trusting Him or a higher power, that I was ready, completely, entirely ready to change my life. And so what I did is it was actually interesting. It was November 1st, so the day before was October 31st. I'm sure I binged on all kinds of sugar. And I want to just tell you, my life in bulimia was lots of purging and lots of eating. Sugar was my biggest. I mean, if I could describe it to you, I would say it was like an IV, where I was constantly craving sugar, craving processed food. I mean, I would go from one binge to another, from purging to just back and forth. But what I did is I drew up a plan of abstinence, and I decided, because I'd been in a 12-step recovery program, I knew that abstinence was an answer for me. I drew up what I did is I looked at the foods in my life that I knew I was most addicted to, that were the trigger foods, the ones that I could not stop eating, I had no control over.
And what were they?
I made a list of those foods. Sugar.
Yep.
I got out all sugar. I have not had, and all processed sugar. So I have not had any sugar in my body for almost 4 years.
Fantastic.
I got out potato chips and Doritos. I got out all of the boxed foods, most of the bagged foods, most of the hand-to-mouth foods, and because all those goldfish, all those things that you just can't put down, and next thing you know, half the box is gone.
Right.
And those became foods that I put on my abstinence list. And I took one day, and my first day was November 1st of 2011.
Cool.
And I had a pretty strong determination. I think, like I said, I was pretty ready to change my life at that point.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned hand-to-mouth foods, because one of the people I've interviewed on Healthy Living is, you may or may not have heard of her. Her name is Kay Shepard, and she's a recovered food addict that helps other people now. And she's written some wonderful books, The Body Knows and At First Bite. And she talks about people that are recovering from food addiction, even those that perhaps never were bulimic, should not use hand-to-mouth foods. Even things that are ostensibly healthy, like air pop popcorn, because she said there's something in our brain chemistry, because when we do binge, the idea is to get in as much as you can quickly. So you do that by shoveling food in with your mouth, and that can sometimes, she says, trigger a binge. So that's why I don't recommend these hand-to-mouth foods for people that are recovering in general. And if people insist on, let's say, eating popcorn, I'll say that's fine, but you have to eat it with chopsticks, because it slows you down, and then it's no longer a hand-to-mouth food. So thanks for bringing that up, because not a lot of people know that. So were you able, and if you don't mind me asking, if there's anything you don't want to answer, just say I choose not to answer. It's not a problem. I never like to put people on the spot. But you mentioned you were in a 12-step recovery program. Would you mind telling which one that is? Because there's quite a few out there, and maybe people don't know what's available.
Sure. The 12-step program I attend is a 12-step addiction recovery group, and it's actually offered through my church. It's a weekly meeting where we follow pretty much the traditional 12 steps of AA, and it's that I found that extremely powerful for me. Going to that meeting allowed me to really, for the first time in my life, be with people who were being really honest about their addictions and really talking truth. And that gave me the courage, I think, to do the same. It helped me step out of my isolation and face the fact that I needed help to overcome my addiction.
That's great. So it wasn't specifically a food addiction program then, so that it could be for any type of addiction.
Actually, yeah, it was for all addictions, but I know a lot of people I have been to FA meetings. But, I haven't done a lot of OA. I found for being bulimic, I found it really difficult for me to go into a program where you had to weigh and measure food right away.
Yeah.
And that if you eat a piece of popcorn, you start at day one.
Yeah. Oh.
And starting over, and it just felt overwhelming to me. And I felt as a bulimic that my biggest goal in getting out of bulimia was to stop the purging.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned what you did, because I interview people all the time, and I am not a fan of the weighing and measuring programs, for treating food addiction. I know there are people that are firm believers in the scale, but I think that becomes another addiction. The people, they stop weighing themselves on the scale, so now they weigh all their food. And, I just interviewed Dr. Lyle last week, who I think you know from True North, and he said that if you're eating the right food, that's just not necessary, that no other species in nature does that. So I'm just bringing this up because I'm glad to show that you were able to recover from a food addiction and lose 100 pounds, and you didn't have to do the weighing and measuring. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah. I just found it to be more obsessive and more self-defeating for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even do it. I came home from the FA meeting and wanted to eat, and then got the scale and realized, I'm in trouble. This isn't going to work. I wanted to say one thing, though, about the 12-step program and just my beginning of my recovery is I realized that the pain of my problem, what I was dealing with, was worse than the pain of the solution. And the amazing thing about this honest realization of defeat and of actually realizing that my life was unmanageable was that's how my recovery began.
Cool. Yeah, that's the first step. That's really awesome, because I encourage people that, if, like you said, you went to the FA meeting, it didn't resonate with you, but there's other groups. So anybody out there getting help with any program or 12-step program, if the first one doesn't work for you, or the first, there's different meetings, don't give up. So that's what I want people to know. Just because I went to one meeting I didn't like, well, there's different ones and there's different groups. So you said that you created an abstinence list. So did you create your own abstinence list, or did you have like a sponsor that suggested that sugar should definitely be on your abstinence list? How did that work, your food plan?
Interestingly, I didn't have a sponsor or anything. I just actually did it on my own. I actually started my entire recovery as far as the food addiction recovery, just going to the 12-step meetings and then just defining a plan of abstinence. I knew, because of my addiction to food, that I could not moderate myself in food. So I knew that drawing a line in the sand about what I needed to do to stay clean and not cross that line was to do complete abstinence. And it's actually so much more freeing, because I don't have to decide everywhere I go how much I'm going to eat, what I'm going to do. I already have a plan.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I always say, I always joke with the people in my Ultimate Weight Loss group, abstinence is bliss. I think the freedom from food addiction, or freedom from any addiction, it feels so much better than the addiction ever did. So I think I'm on your side. So, a lot of times in these food recovery programs, they say you must be abstinent of sugar, flour, and wheat. That's what I hear all the time. Was that the case for you, or was just sugar was really the most important thing that you needed to draw the line in the sand with?
That's a great question. For me, as a bulimic, again, I'm taking it from a bulimic standpoint, because that's really, I could not take everything out all at once.
Okay.
So no, I didn't start. I started with the sugar because I knew that was my biggest. And I knew if I could get the sugar out, I could work through other things. I did. I'm just now starting a abstinent program of flour, and I did not take wheat out, but I also do not use alcohol.
That's good. Yeah, I don't either. That's terrific. That's that. Do you still attend the meetings regularly?
Yeah, I've been attending the 12-step recovery meetings for 4.5 years, and in those meetings I find so much strength and hope. It's actually been an amazing experience, because it's really a spiritual recovery of that I've taken, as well as a physical recovery.
Yeah. That's what I hear from everyone. I have never done a 12-step program, and it kind of makes me want to, because I just don't know which one to go to, because I hear such wonderful things that really it's a spiritual recovery program, and it puts that first. And I think that's so important, because I remember when I didn't attend one, but I remember after 6 years of bulimia, one day I really just hit my knees and said to God, please, Chase, I prayed. I said, please just take this away. I'll be any weight you want, but just have me eat like a normal person. In hindsight, I wish I would have said I'd take a different weight, but at the time it was just,
Uh-huh.
because I ended up staying heavy for many, many years after that. But even though it wasn't a 12-step program, I basically did have to admit that I was powerless over this and turn it over to a higher power. In my case, it was God, because I couldn't manage it myself. And I just don't know how you did it for 38 years, because 6 years, it's just hard on the body. It's tiring. It's like, it feels like your eyes are going to pop out of your head. That's what I remember about it.
Yes. Yeah. It's something that sometimes when I talk about, I cry. It's
Yeah.
and the more bulimic women that I talk to, it is a devastating disease on the body and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the soul is actually the despair and the hopelessness and the feeling of feeling so worthless and feeling so powerless over it. And physically, yes, it just completely takes havoc. It really destroys your body, but it hurt. I mean, even with all that pain and all that I felt, I was still driven to continue the behavior.
It's crazy.
And I don't know how I made it 38 years.
Well, I guess you made it so that you could tell your story and help all the other people out there that haven't made it yet. That's what I'm thinking.
That's my greatest hope. I am so humbled and so grateful to be where I am, and that God has helped me get free of this.
Yeah.
But it's something that's taken it's been the hardest thing I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken so much to face it and to come out of the bulimia.
One of the things I don't understand is when we look at your before and after that was in the magazine and on the True North website, you, even when you were very heavy on the left, you were still engaging in bulimia and vomiting. How come did it just one day stop working? I mean, because you said you had weighed 105 pounds, before the bulimia. So did it just stop working one day? Because I've never heard that happening.
After years and decades of bulimia, my weight fluctuated some. I was able to maintain a low weight for a lot of years, but as it continued, and the purging becomes more and more. It becomes more difficult to purge food out, and so the amount of food that I was taking in far outweighed what I could purge out, and honestly, it quit working, and my weight continued to soar up to. I was up to 230 pounds, and still a full daily. I was bulimic every day of my life.
Wow.
And had. So it quit working. It wasn't the answer to maintaining my weight or managing my weight.
Yeah, I can imagine it must have gotten pretty expensive if you were taking in sometimes 20,000, 30,000 calories, unless it was just cheap processed food. That's kind of expensive after a while.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of that food, just goes right literally down the toilet.
which anyway, except for you, it came out the wrong end.
Yeah. It was, and there was a lot of guilt involved in the amount of cost that the food, and when you go out to eat or you go somewhere and you're going to purge the meal, and it's a $20 meal, or you're buying all this food and that it's just you're just it produces a lot of shame and guilt.
You said that nobody knew, I'm assuming your family and friends. Now, obviously, your story's out there on the internet, so they probably know now. Is hindsight 2020? Are any of them saying something like, I kind of maybe thought something was up, but I didn't say anything, or were you so good at it that they just were completely clueless?
I've told my sisters who didn't know, and they really didn't know. They thought that it had ended in high school or early college years. I haven't shared it a lot with people right around me, but most of the responses people would be they would have no idea.
Wow, even your children.
My children don't know about it, AJ.
Wow.
They still don't know, but I'm sure when they find out, I don't think they would have any idea.
Wow. Are they grown children? Are they grown children now? I don't.
Yeah. I have a 19-year-old son, a 21-year-old son, and a 24-year-old son.
Okay, so they're grown. So I'm surprised they haven't Googled you and sometimes oh, hey, Mom, Hannah. whole nother life here,
Yeah, that's a concern for me, and that's something that I will have to deal with when I'm ready. But
Sure.
yeah.
So, how long did it take you to lose the 100 pounds? Because even without the bulimia, 100-pound weight loss is just remarkable, and I know that alone inspires so many people because there's so many people that want to be able to do that.
Okay. Well, what happened is once I started the recovery from the food addiction, and got off those processed foods that I talked about, all those trigger foods, I began to start a program of exercise. I was starting at the gym even at 230 pounds. And so I got the first 50 pounds off in about just doing that change. Probably took me about a year and a half. But I was still eating breads. I was still eating things like lasagna. I was still binging on foods, and I was still purging.
Okay.
So what happened is once I started the bulimia recovery, I had to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful because I did not want to purge. And I knew that there was a very fine line. My body was not used to having to have food. It was very uncomfortable for me to feel a feeling of being full and sit with it.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of other bulimics, and that's very, very common. It's very, very hard. You're not used to it. You don't know what to do.
Sure.
You just have this impulse. So as I worked on it and as I just slowly learned how to eat again and keep food in my body, I realized, of course, that I would need to eat less because I did not want to push myself to that point of where I'd want to purge. And so as I worked through it and just kept, I honestly had to just reduce the amount I was eating and change, do those hard things of just changing and stepping up the exercise. And the weight started to come off, even in the bulimia recovery, even without any purging, which was actually exactly opposite of what I thought. When I started the bulimia recovery, I pretty much accepted I was ready to gain 50 or 60 pounds. I was willing to do that because I wanted to be free of the bulimia.
Isn't that interesting that it was the keeping the food down in your case that led to the weight loss, not the releasing of the food? That's huge, that's a good lesson that you can actually eat and lose weight.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that what you eat it's really what you eat.
Sure.
That makes all the difference. And something else that I wanted to talk about that we had talked about is how powerful exercise and movement has been in my recovery.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. But before you tell me about your particular exercise, aren't there some types of bulimics that's what they use? They do over exercise to the point where they're just like really doing too much of that, or maybe doing laxative abuse too. I mean, isn't that sometimes symptoms for some people?
Yeah, that's a very common way to manage what you would call bulimia as well, where you're binging and then running out and trying to run 5 or 10 miles to burn it off, or heavy laxative use after the eating, which becomes also very, very addictive. Just like the purging, all of this is very, very addictive behavior. It's not just the eating in the bulimia; it's the addictive purging, and those are things that you have to address and look at.
So tell us about your exercise, because the fact that even when you were heavy, I think if you had known you were going to recover, this would have been the greatest documentary. We could have been following you, because just the fact that you were willing to exercise at 230 pounds, a lot of people that are overweight, they feel so much shame about their body that they don't want to start an exercise program till they're slender, when in reality, that's what's really going to help you not only lose the weight, but increase your self-esteem. And so I think that's really, so many parts of your story just have so much encouragement in them to me.
Yeah, I was always an athletic person. I loved sports as a teenager, so it was very hard for me to become an obese person. And I knew that one of the commitments I would have to make, along with the abstinence, was the commitment to exercise. And I have come to enjoy exercise and movement. As a bulimic, it may be hard to understand, but a lot of bulimics hate their body. And I know that's true for a lot of people, a lot of women, but you don't even want to feel your body. You don't want to feel it. You don't want to feel anything about it. You don't even want to feel that you just want to reject it, and you're constantly rejecting your body. What I found through exercise is that it got me back into my body. It got me back into feeling and feeling what it felt like to actually feel empowered and feel muscle and almost re-enter my body and start to, like I said, it was very empowering. It was I started to really enjoy that feeling. And one of the things I do when I exercise is I do try to push myself, and I try to feel not pain, but I try to push it to a limit where I just feel that feeling of, and it makes me feel like I can do hard things. When I exercise hard, I feel like I can do other things that are hard. And a lot of people have asked me when they've seen the picture or they've seen me in person, this is probably one of the biggest questions people ask me is, what did you do? What kind of exercise?
That's going to be my next question.
Okay. What I did, what I could start with was weightlifting. And I started a program of probably 3 times a week where I started a strength training program. And even though I was very obese, I was working out about a 50-minute workout, because I couldn't do a whole lot of cardio. I couldn't do a lot of things. Unfortunately, it was really hard to do yoga or a lot of things, but I could do that, which again, the weightlifting was extremely empowering for me. It really helped me feel better, and it helps with the metabolism, and it also, as I've recovered and as I've lost the weight, I don't have a lot of the extra skin, the 20 or 30 pounds of skin that a lot of people have to have removed.
That's
and
terrific.
I think because I consistently did the weightlifting through the recovery, it just continued to keep those muscles strong, and I have no extra skin. If you saw my body, you'd never know that I had lost 100 pounds.
That's a great piece of advice. That's a really good incentive for people to do that, because I know that surgery. I actually was watching a show called Botched, where a lady had botched plastic surgery having that skin removal operation. So that's another great reason to start an exercise program now and not wait until you lose the weight. And if you can't, do what you can do. If it's just walking in a shallow pool, but do something, in other words.
Yeah. I promote exercise. I just think it's, no matter what your weight is, it's worth doing. And plus it just relieves you from. It's such a great way to feel better mentally and emotionally. And another thing that I started doing too, AJ, was I started doing swimming, which I found really, really powerful for me. Relaxing. It's meditative for me, and I felt like I could do that even as a heavier person. And not hurt myself.
Yeah, water stuff is great when you have the excess weight, because there's, it's not weight bearing. So that's a really good thing for people to consider.
Yeah. And all of these things, when you exercise, I mean, your mood is better, you're more relaxed. And I always, my idea of finding an exercise or movement program is find something that you love and that you enjoy and that you feel good doing.
Right. And if you don't love it at first, find what you hate the least, but do something. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Same thing with eating vegetables. A lot of people say, I can't eat vegetables. I go, well, find the one you hate the least, and then eventually you're going to like it. That's the thing, Jamie, about exercise, because unfortunately I didn't really start exercising until I was almost 52, I'm ashamed to say. But once you do it, you really do like it, and it does become addictive in a good way, and then you really look forward to it, and then you love what it does for not just your body, but your brain.
Yes. Yeah. It's helped me so much in actually overcoming and dealing with a lot of the feelings that I have, and a lot of the inner struggles that I have when I go exercise, especially when I have urges to, I feel the craving or the triggers to binge or to overeat. That's one of the first go-tos I do is just get out and start moving and exercising, and that frees my head up. It usually the triggers things stop, slow down, and I don't feel like I did 10 minutes ago and wanting to eat.
Right. Well, you change your state. It seems like it's a great coping strategy, and anything you do to change that, calling a friend, or going to a meeting, or blogging, or journaling or something, just if you can just create that like delay, a lot of times the urges and the feelings go away.
Yeah. I've used the tool of writing a lot. I found that if you can get underneath what's going on with you, that's a way underneath the food what's really going on. And a lot of times when you write, you find out that there's a lot more inside of you. You really, it's freeing, and it's a great way to it's one of those tools of recovery that I've used.
Another thing I love about your story is I don't know if you had planned to come out, and share this story with the world, but thanks to Dr. Goldhammer, it is shared with the world, and it needs to be shared. But tell us a little bit about that, because I love Dr. Goldhammer. I've had him on twice, and did you ever think that just going somewhere for a chiropractic adjustment would lead to all this?
No, I didn't. In fact, I went to him because a friend of mine had gone to True North and loved it, and she'd found freedom from food addiction and adopted their program. And so I went to Dr. Goldhammer, and as I went for a chiropractic adjustment, and as I started to tell him my story, he was actually astounded with what had happened in my life, how I looked at that point, that I'd been able to get recovery and from the bulimia after so many years. The whole story, he just kind of was. He couldn't say anything but, "Can I please have your story? Will you please write up your story for us and share it on the True North website?" Which he started something called True North Navigators, which are people who have gotten themselves out of the pleasure trap, out of the addiction, and have gotten free. And so he asked me to write my story, and so I did that with an editor who works at True North as well. And that was the first time I'd ever written or done anything to expose myself, any of this, to anyone.
Well, that's very brave, and the world will appreciate your efforts, I'm sure. How many people other than me contacted you? Because I just wanted to say, hey, you're great. When I read that, I'm like, this is cool. This is a newsworthy story.
Oh, thanks, AJ. Yeah, you were the first person.
Yay!
You were the first person that emailed me, and it was great. And actually, I had quite a few people. I have had a lot of people inquire. There were people from all over the country, professors. There was one lady who had actually suffered in bulimia 40 years.
Wow.
And had never heard anybody tell their story, because many, many times people that are bulimic you just don't talk. You live in so much shame and isolation, and it just thrives. Bulimia thrives in the darkness.
Sure, all
it thrives in it's like a cockroach inside of you that when you shine the light on it, that cockroach wants to run to another corner. And it just wants it. But the only way that you get out of bulimia and you get out of that is to shine the light on it.
Yeah,
to no longer let yourself live in the darkness. And so for me to get free, I needed to talk about it. I needed to get help. And one of the ways I did that was I was very blessed with being able to find a therapist who was an extremely kind, non-judgmental, positive person. And I just want to tell you a little bit about that, because that part of that was very monumental in my recovery process. I had come to a point where I was in the food addiction. I continued to give up those trigger foods. I continued to live my plan of abstinence, but I was also living as a bulimic, and I knew that was something I wanted to change in my life. And changing an eating disorder was getting out of the bulimia was actually much, much harder than changing the food. It's something that is, it's just self-harm, and it's something that requires a tremendous amount of resilience and courage and perseverance. And it's you have to be willing to travel a pretty hard, long, difficult road. Like I said, probably the hardest road I've ever traveled and even crawled. But I knew deep down in my heart that it would all be worth it if I would just keep trying.
Yeah.
And one of the things I had to do in the bulimia recovery was separate myself from the bulimia. I believed for so many years of my life that all I was bulimia, that was my definition of who Jamie was. That was the secret person of who I was. And it's very powerful in bulimia recovery to get that outside of you, to shine the light on that darkness and pull it out of you and realize that that is not who you are, that eating disorder voice that's telling you these things, that's designed to harm you, is not your true voice. Your true voice is who you are, coming to find out who you truly are, and that is where recovery really starts. And I found someone who, one of the interesting things she told me when I first started therapy and went to her, she said, if you purge and you need to purge, don't feel bad about it and don't shame yourself.
Yeah.
And she listened to my story. She brought out strengths, and she helped me literally bring this bulimia out of the darkness. And you can imagine 38 years of darkness.
Wow. No, I can't.
38 years of isolation, and but it was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. The most powerful, amazing thing.
You know, what's interesting about this disease, Jamie, it's like if you're anorexic, and you said you were, and I was in my teen years, people notice. I mean, especially, you know, if it gets real severe, people like, but if you're bulimic, you were bulimic when you were heavy, there are people, it could be any size. It's not a disease that people can really see, you know, and so people aren't going to say, well, you know, if somebody has a friend that's anorexic and they see them losing weight, they'll notice, there'll be an intervention, they'll try, you know, if it's a child, the family will get them help. But with bulimia, it is so hidden, it is so secret that unless, you know, your mom hears you throwing up or, you know, or something, it can be hidden, like you said, and you hid it for almost 40 years.
You know, that's the sad part about it. That's the hard part about bulimia, and for bulimics is that many times you're living a life where you're giving, you're performing on the outside, but you live this hidden life, and people don't know. And it just becomes more and more of a silent prison where you feel like you're beaten down daily, and you're living in this, like I said, almost like a cage that you feel like you can't get out of.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can't get out of it. That's what addiction feels like in general, whatever it is. You know, I think it's a horrible feeling.
Yeah, it was. I'm going to say that living the bulimia, I honestly thought that it would be something that I would die in, and I would die, and then no one would know why I died.
Yeah.
It was very sad. It was a life of loneliness and a life of tremendous pain.
I'm so sorry, but I'm so glad that you're here now, and you know, you can tell your story. So.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that I was able to come out of it, and that I found a very compassionate, kind person who helped me do that, who didn't define me by the bulimia, who didn't define the emotions that I felt. She allowed me to express myself. Her words of kindness and her believing in me and seeing me for who I really was. She saw me for a person, the person I really was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was finally ready to let go and put those crutches down and find the hope that I needed to find, which was just a tiny ray of hope. But I found it, and I began my bulimia recovery.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me, well, there's so many interesting things about your story, but it's not like you had tried to recover multiple times and relapse. It's almost like you just one day decided you're going to recover, and then you did, you know? I mean, you really had it seems like the wherewithal, the will that you were going to do this.
You know, I did have, I think in any type of addiction, you have to get to a point where you've kind of hit bottom,
Sure.
where it is the pain of the addiction is just so great, and it was at that point. I mean, I was 50 years old and had lived this life for 38 years, and I think I'd had enough pain. I think it was something where I had to choose my life. I had to choose to want to live.
Yeah.
I had to realize that I mattered, and and I knew that recovery would require a lot of me. I knew that it would be something where I would be taking a whole different path. And one of those things that I've had to do in recovery is change how I live my life. I can no longer please people and do the life that I always lived. I've had to make a lot of changes in how I treat myself and allow myself to matter in the picture. And I couldn't let shame rule my life anymore. Shame was all I ever knew. And I've learned to live a more honest life, because when you live in an addiction, especially bulimia, you're being dishonest with yourself every day and those around you. And you have to become more transparent and more vulnerable. And learn that you're enough, and that that every bite of food is enough. That you don't have to eat the whole, just go on. It's enough.
Yeah.
And that I was enough, and that moment of truth helped me get through.
Yeah. How many years were you suffering from anorexia before the bulimia hit, if you don't mind me asking? I'm just curious.
The anorexia was really short-lived, probably only like 6 to 8 months.
Really? Okay. Because I just wonder, because, obviously I'm not an expert in this at all, but I'm wondering how many people start with the anorexia. I know I did, and I wonder if maybe there are people out there that just went straight to the bulimia. But the other thing I want to say is, I kind of blame the processed food industry a little bit too for this, because I have no way of knowing this, but I wonder if this disease existed, like in the 1800s, because the foods that people, you had mentioned sugar was the main thing with you, the sugar and the chips, you weren't binging on, carrots, as far as I know. And so these processed foods, the things with the sugar and the high fat, high sugar, high salt foods, these are addictive foods. And so it makes it much harder when these things are in our environment all the time. You go to the hardware store, you go to the pet store, you cannot get away from these highly addictive foods.
You're so absolutely right. And these highly addictive, chemically made foods are a setup for people.
Yeah.
And until you walk away from those foods and just, again, it goes back to that abstinence.
Yeah.
And get those foods out of your life. And I've had to really, really be vigilant about where I go and get out of places like Walmart and places that were old places where I would go get my stash of food.
Yep.
But I want to say a couple of things that I think are really important, and that is that if you have a lapse or a slip up in any addiction, whether it's bulimia or food addiction, or you're trying anything, it's so important to not feel like, it's so important to forgive yourself and to move on.
Absolutely.
To just take a breath and let it go, and realize one of the things that's helped me so much is realize that I have a new moment, that it's a new day, that it's a new start, that I don't, because my typical pattern was all or nothing. If I binged, it was the rest of the day. It was all day. It would never end. I feel like that has sorry.
That's okay.
I think I've had to get really also in the recovery, just get used to being in any kind of recovery, is just getting used to being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes life is just uncomfortable.
Yep.
Emotionally and physically, and realizing that it's okay, that it will pass, that feeling will pass, that just stick with it, stay with it, work through those feelings, allow it to be okay. Because I look at recovery now, it's the rest of my life. My plan of abstinence will be forever. I don't look at it like I may be changing it out. It will be it's a lifetime of commitment, but it's what I want. What I get from this is the sweetest freedom.
Sure.
It is the most beautiful life to live, a different life where I feel like I have restored and reclaimed my health, and I have serenity and I have peace. I can live with dignity and I can live with freedom and self-respect. I can live with honesty and an honor code to myself. My life has more purpose and more focus. I can live in the present moment. And I live one day at a time and one moment at a time.
Yeah. And that's so hard for so many people, but that really is the answer.
It really is. Living one day at a time and one moment and 1 second sometimes, and living in gratitude and looking for those things in your life that happen in your life that are good, and writing them and journaling them, all those things, reading and writing. I also I'm accountable for my food every day. I write to a sponsor and write what I eat.
Yeah, we do that in our Ultimate Weight Loss program, not necessarily with a sponsor, but we have people write down, keep a journal. Be accountable, sure.
Yeah, a lot of the things that come up for me as I'm talking about this is just really becoming aware of all the broken thinking, that thinking in our minds that we have about ourselves or about food, and working to change those thoughts, because really a lot of the healing comes through correction in our thinking. The thoughts usually always lead to the actions.
Yep.
And realizing too that you don't have to be perfect, engaging that voice of kindness instead of criticism, and just discovering, really it's just been a discovery for me. It's been really recovery, but recovering myself, discovering myself, finding who I really am. And I love the word freedom. I wrote this at the end of my story, but it's so true. Is to feel free, is to get free, is because you're willing to set yourself free. And it is really the most beautiful feeling in the world to be free from addiction.
I hear you. I always quote Denzel Washington in the movie Flight, my favorite movie on addiction, where he says in the last line of the movie, he's in prison, he's lost his job, all his friends, his family, and he says, for the first time in my life, I'm finally free. And that movie just rocked my world, because I'm like, wow, I want that. And you can have that. And you have it. And that's probably why you're so awesome and feel so good now.
It is. And I want everyone to know too that just because I've had the recovery, it's every day that I work on this. I'm very vigilant. I have to work every day to sustain my recovery. It takes a lot of perseverance, and it takes effort. But this life that I've gained and the dignity that I have the dignity and respect I have for myself and others is so profound that the food is, and where I was, it's just, I will never go back to it.
Yeah.
But I just want everyone to know that if you're in despair, if you're in the disease of bulimia or addiction, I just want to give all of you hope that there really is a way out, that there really is a way to get free from the bondage of eating disorders and all the pain surrounding it. And I'm telling my story to the world because I really want to help people get free, to inspire them, because it's nothing I never thought would ever happen in my life. And I'm so grateful to God, and I'm so grateful for the miracle that's occurred in my life, and the people in my life, and the opportunity that I've had to get freedom from this addiction.
Well, we're so grateful for you. I'm sorry for what you had to endure to get to this point, but we're grateful that you did tell your story, and you're now going to be able to help so many people. Now, to help them, if they want to get in touch with you, we said it at the beginning, but sometimes people tune in late. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you and find out more about Jamie and her story?
The best way to get in touch with me is to email me through rockandresilience@gmail.com. I also have a Facebook page that's Rockin' Resilience. But that's probably the best way is just to email me. That's where I take. That's anyone can email me. Anyone can get in touch with me. I would love to talk to anyone. I would love to give you any hope and any encouragement. I just want you to know out there, everybody, that there is a way to get free, and it is possible. It is truly possible that you can really create a new relationship with food and a new relationship with yourself, and that you can let the past go. That forgiving yourself and beginning again and moving on is the answer, and it's the way to get free. I love the word freedom. It means everything to me.
Yeah, I love it too.
Because I lived feeling in bondage. I lived feeling like I literally was in a cage in a prison that I was locked up in. And getting free and helping others get free is just the dream of my life. And it's what I want to do for the rest of my life, is help people find recovery, find what it takes to.
Well, that is beautiful and inspiring, and your story is just one of the most amazing I've ever heard. I heard a doorbell ring, so that might be the clue that we are out of time. So, Jamie,
yeah.
Thank you so much for being so brave and vulnerable, because I know it couldn't be. I mean, the bulimia couldn't have been easy, but the coming out and sharing this with the world, I'm sure, was not easy either. So we thank you for doing that, because I know that even if there was just one person on this call that will tell one person, somebody out there is going to be helped by hearing your story and realize, you know what, she did it. There's hope for me too.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you so much for letting me talk today.
I'm going to be in Santa Rosa pretty soon, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Maybe you can give me some workout tips, because that's the weightlifting's not my strong suit yet.
Hey, I'll get you going. It'll be great. Thank you so much.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank all of you for listening to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious. Thanks, everybody.